There we go. All right, thank you all so much for joining. This is our March webinar, which is going to be a panel discussion. We're having a conversation with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and the Klamath Tribes on safe routes and active transportation initiatives in their tribal regions. All right. So the purpose of today we're here to learn more about the very specific efforts of transportation planners from Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and Klamath Tribes and what they do to promote active transportation and safe routes in their areas. We're going to hear about their unique opportunities and challenges that they've seen in their communities, as well as get some resources to learn more about the tribal lands that you live on. Here's our agenda today. We're going to start out with a quick presentation from Leanne Ferguson, our ODOT Safe Routes to School Construction Manager. Then we'll move on to our main event, which is the panel discussion with Dani Schulte, Jared Hall, and Les Anderson. And then we'll finish up too. We'll have some time for some audience questions. If you have those, go ahead and as we're going along, put them in the chat. Then we'll do some quick announcements and share some resources. All right. And before we start too, I wanted to encourage everyone to visit this website. I'm putting it in the chat right now. This is called Native Land Digital. You can type in your address and it will tell you which tribal lands that you live on. I would encourage everyone after the panel discussion to go and learn more about the tribal lands they live on and become more connected with that, you know, watch a documentary, read some books, and just learn more. And so as we're beginning here, I'm going to pass it on to Leanne, who's going to give a quick presentation on federal tribes in Oregon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leanne. I work for ODOT, and I have the privilege of being part of a class at PSU this year called the Certificate in Tribal Relations. And so I'm right in the middle of that class and I'm learning a lot and wanted to provide just a little bit of what I've learned so far as we enter into this discussion today and panel discussion. And thanks everyone on the panel for being here. So this is just very, very basic information that I didn't know coming into some of this work. And so I thought I'd share it really quickly. There are 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon. And here's a map of where all of those tribes are. Oftentimes these tribes are confederation of tribes that came together through treaties over time as the United States came in and took lands away from the tribes. So it's really important to consider the full name of the tribe whenever you're talking about them, just because they are oftentimes representing several tribes. A few things to remember: that tribes are sovereign nations. So tribal sovereignty refers to the right of American Indians and Alaska Natives to govern themselves. The U.S. Constitution recognizes Indian tribes as distinct governments, and they have, with a few exceptions, the same powers as a federal government to regulate their internal affairs. So when the state is partnering with the tribes, it's like a neighbor to neighbor relationship with a lot of history to take into account as well. But one thing I wanted to share was that tribes are sovereign nations, and each tribe does things very, very differently. So today we'll hear from 2 different tribes, but we know that the other tribes in Oregon are all very different and do things in very different ways. So just because one tribe does something one way doesn't necessarily mean that other tribes are going to do it that way. They're all very distinct communities and cultures. And like I said before, to just remember to include the full name of the tribe or confederation of tribes whenever you're learning about them and referring to them. For example, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, where Dani Schulte will be speaking from today, is a union of 3 tribes, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla. So just shortening it to Umatilla leaves out the other tribes that are an essential part of that group. If you want to do some more learning, I'm wondering, Emily, if you could put these in the chat as we kind of talk about it. But my introduction or a free introduction to some of this information is an online class that Oregon State actually puts out. Anyone can take it at your own pace. It's for educators for outdoor school, but I found it really helpful, and it's a really good introduction to some of these topics. You could watch a documentary specifically about Oregon Tribes. Broken Treaties is one put out by Oregon Public Broadcasting. You could visit a museum, the museum at Warm Springs, the Cultural Institute. I do not know how to pronounce it. I'm hoping that Dani might be able to do it so better justice than I can. Tamastlit Cultural Institute, and the Chachalu Museum and Cultural Center on Grand Ronde. So, or the Grand Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. Also, some additional reading that you might find really helpful is books like An Indigenous People's History of the United States or Working in Indian Country are two that I can highly recommend. So some additional learning for you to jump into as you learn more about tribes that are our neighbors here in Oregon. That's all from my end. Thank you, Emily, for letting me provide a little bit of information. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I really appreciate that. That is, yeah, I think great knowledge for all of us. I didn't know a lot of that as well. So thank you for sharing that. All right, and now we will introduce our panelists and have a moderated Q&A. I have some questions for them, but I'll just do a quick introduction and then I'm going to pass it off to the three of you to tell us more about yourself and your tribes and the history and culture of your tribe. So first we have Dani Schulte, who is the transportation planner for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. We have Jared Hall, who is the planning director for Klamath Tribes, and Les Anderson, who's the TTP manager for Klamath Tribes. And Dani, I'll start with you since you're on the top of the list there.
Thanks, Alphabet. Yeah, so I'm Dani Schulte, as she said. I am out in northeastern Oregon on the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and I am not a CTUIR tribal member, just to be transparent. I'm from Portland and I moved out here to do this job. But I've found northeastern Oregon a very beautiful and fulfilling place to be working on transportation issues.
Excellent. Jared, would you like to introduce yourself next and share a little more about Klamath Tribes?
Yeah, Jared Hall, Klamath Tribes Planning Director. We're located down here in Southern Oregon, just along the, all throughout Klamath County, which goes all the way to the border of California. I am a Klamath tribal member. I was born and raised in this community. Even though we don't have a formal reservation, I think the town of Chiloquin is more of the headquarters and the base operation for the Klamath Tribes since it was restored in 1986. So yeah, I was moved to the planning director position in 2019. And with that, I got accustomed or took over the responsibility of oversight of the tribal transportation program, where we do a lot of the transportation projects related to our tribal properties and associated operations. So that's where I've been the last 3 years, and I've worked for the tribe on and off for the past 15 years. So it's great to be here to speak today about this topic. And yeah, I'm not a history buff. Maybe Les can, when he goes next, he can describe more of the history. He has a relation in the cultural department, so he has a lot of knowledge. But I'm not the guy to give you the history of the Klamath Tribes. So I'll cut myself off there and let Les go.
Good morning. Thank you, Jared. Les Anderson, TTP manager or tribal transportation manager. Just new to the position, as Jared had mentioned, I came out of Culture and Heritage, the Culture and Heritage shop, and been working for the tribes now for a few years, kind of off and on. Took a little, was hired on back in early 2000s. Took a little career change and got into archaeology a little bit, and then recently came back into Culture and Heritage, and then transferred over to transportation. It's as Jared said, we're in Southern Oregon. Of course, we were terminated tribe in 1952. We did have a large, when you look at the viewfinder there, you'll see there's Klamath, Yahushkin, and Modoc, and hence the reason why we're called the Klamath Tribes. And so, and our casino is called Kamoya for Klamath, Klamath, Modoc, and Yahushkin. And so, yeah, we had quite a few acres of ceded lands even into Northern California. With that, moving into the tribal transportation role, we're working with our infrastructure that we have on all of our buildings and parking lots and streets, and the few roads we do have is challenging. We work with the county and the city of Chiloquin, of course, and we do have a bike ped plan that we're trying to implement. But of course, I think the thing that we're all kind of running into is funding. Where can we find those dollars? Actually, though, with the new infrastructure bill coming out, we might be able to access some of those. And with especially with partnering up with a lot of the folks, I think that's probably on the call today. Partners in the community that you really have a passion for safe route to schools, and so I think this is a great opportunity, and as we move forward to reach out.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing. Does that transitions us nicely into my first question, which is, are students going to schools on or off your reservation? And what are your experiences working with schools or serving schools with education and infrastructure projects? And I'll let whoever wants to go first and answer that can go first. Or I can call on someone. Dani, would you like to start then?
Sure. So CTUIR students go to schools both on and off the reservation. A lot of them have preferences based on kind of, standards of academic performance, school ratings, that they might go to a different nearby school, and some of them have a preference for access to the very specific CTUIR cultural education programming that's available at the high school on the CTUIR reservation. And so we kind of are interwoven with the Pendleton School District and some other adjacent ones like Athena, Weston, Helix, all of them. And the other issue is that the CTUIR reservation only has a high school and a Head Start program. And so all students who are elementary or middle school age go to school off of the reservation. And so there are kind of gaps in the availability of bicycle or pedestrian infrastructure to connect even internally on the reservation, and let alone externally to the other schools in the area.
Yeah, and Jared and Liz, from our conversations, it sounds like it is a different situation with students attending school off the reservation. So I'd be interested for you to share more about that.
Yeah, like we mentioned before, and I think Les kind of went into detail about it. We don't have a formal reservation land base. We are acquiring land and putting it into the tribal trust status, which is officially under the technical term of reservation, fits that. But as far as how a community is developed or how a community interacts, specific to schools and youth, it's a very difficult task, because the way we were terminated, with families kind of disseminating out, a lot of our families moved after termination over the hill throughout the Willamette Valley. And we obviously have a portion of our population here, a main base. And even within the confines of Klamath County, which is our service district, service area, because we don't have a formal land base and we're restored without one, in our Restoration Act, it designates Klamath County as our service area. So anybody residing in Klamath County can come to our tribal facilities, whether it's the clinic, the Youth and Family Guidance Center, or our administration headquarters, and receive services if qualified. So with planning all tribal programs, I think we run into this question all the time: how do we service the people when we're so segregated by distance and logistics and jurisdictions? It makes it pretty difficult to plan something as seem simple as a bike path. It's very hard for us because we talk a lot internally about equity or equitable. And when a tribe does something in one area where some tribal members live, is it equitable if it's just in that area compared to all the other areas where we know tribal members live? So it really creates logistical challenges. And I think Les probably said it best: we run into funding because we only have a base amount coming in every year, and we have to plan those dollars out accordingly, because not only is there construction on the front end, which is a huge cost, especially nowadays, you have the maintenance on the back end that has to be maintained, and that becomes a challenge as you start to build up your transportation facilities. You have to go back and maintain them for the life of the tribe, even long before we're even, when we're out of our positions. And so it's really hard when you talk about planning projects, how to best impact the tribal community, and more specifically our youth. But we have taken steps with the city of Chiloquin, perhaps, and the Oregon Department of Transportation to do interagency collaborations, take a look at preconceptual designs, take a look at estimated amounts of projects that could be done within at least our headquarter areas so they could access tribal services and programs from the school. It's a big project, and we know already just by looking at the estimates, we wouldn't be able to fund it ourselves as a tribe. So we're obviously have challenges with specific projects like biped plans, because it needs the city of Chiloquin to cost share on those projects, and they're obviously a small rural town that's underserved, not a big tax base, not a lot of, this isn't Bend, Oregon, so not a lot of tax dollars being generated, not a lot of commerce, and not a lot of living wage opportunities to raise a family here. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's why me and Les are kind of new to this, because we definitely know it's something we have to address. Our transportation program's more been on heavy construction, building parking lots, stormwater drainage, roads, and then just more recently maintaining big road systems. And now we're kind of diverting our program over into paying attention to something like this, the safety of the youth or safety of pedestrians in general in the community. And so this is a new one for us, and we're here just to learn, and we don't have no hard concrete plans, but we're going to start dabbling in some projects in the next coming years. So I can let Les take over from there and maybe talk more specifically about what we're looking at.
All right, thank you, Jared. Yeah, and just to touch on something that Jared mentioned earlier about our community. Our community is probably spread out all across Oregon because of termination. A lot of our families were displaced. Not just in Oregon, but Southern California, all over the country. That you probably have, for those that are participating, you probably have a Klamath tribal member in your community that's participating in one of the schools, from Portland, Salem, Albany, Eugene, all the way down to Medford, and of course all throughout the state. And I'm assuming that there's probably all the other tribes are similar to us as well. We have tribal members in all the communities. We're currently working on a project now for we just completed a new fitness center, and it's right across from our tribal administration building, and next to our clinic, and next to our early childhood development center. So it's conveniently located right there. But we do have a challenge, because it is the high school and grade school are on the other side of town, and of course there's a railroad track system there. There's a rail system and a bridge which connects one side of town to the other. And so as Jared was saying, Chiloquin's kind of a small town, limited dollars on what they can do with their funding for their road systems. And so how do we get the kids from one side of town to the other? And of course the city and ODOT's working on developing a plan. We do have that bike ped plan in place. But once again, we have to take it in segments. How do we, slowly do we get there? And so now that we've got the fitness center, it is, and it's actually right down from a ODOT shop, right where the speed limits changed from what it used to be 35 to now it's 55. So of course there's a challenge there, and they didn't realize that was coming. And so we're gonna have to get the speed limit changed back down. But how do we have a safe crossway, not only for the kids, but the whole community? They can come down, our tribal members go back and forth to the clinic, to the fitness center, and those that are at admin go vice versa, go across. So we're going to be developing a work session with ODOT and moving into showing some of the designs. I mean, they were aware of it as well earlier last year, I should say late last year, when this all started to come into place, that we're going to start working towards making a safe crossing there and a pathway. Of course, proper planning is it's just something that you don't write on a napkin and all of a sudden let's go out and do it. So we're going to take some time and start looking at some studies and just how can we develop the most safest and efficient way to get folks across that street. And so hopefully within a year, we'll probably have a plan, and maybe we might even be breaking ground. But that's going to be our biggest challenge. Of course, rural communities, they don't really have sidewalks. It's not like you're walking downtown Portland or Eugene. So what we have is a trail, in some of along our streets. So that's going to be a work in progress, but it's going to be some challenges on it, but I think the end product and the final outcome is going to be a safe passage. Not only is it going to probably slow some of the traffic down with some of the lighting signage that we'll have, but it's going to provide a safe passage for the whole community.
No, thank you for speaking to that too. And I think that is a major part of Safe Routes is, connecting schools to other areas that they need to go as well, to this fitness center. So that's really great that you have that underway. That also leads me nicely into my next question for Dani, which is what are some current projects and initiatives going on right now in CTUIR for Safe Routes? And what challenges do you see with implementing Safe Routes projects, and what opportunities are you seeing?
Yeah, so the historic mission of the CTUIR reservation was located in a low-lying, flood-prone area. The community, the tribal community before reservation, they called it the July grounds because it's the place you go in July when it's dry. So it wasn't really intended to be a permanent base, but that's how that's how settler development works. And so they've, over the past a decade and change, it started around 2010, they've been moving their tribal services hub out of the flood prone area uphill a little bit. And it's about 1.5 miles distance between the two. So that is kind of the big challenge we're trying to address right now, is that the old hub was right in the middle of a bunch of like residential, kind of suburban style residential development. So students had greater opportunities to walk to school, and now all of that, the only kind of residential area on the reservation, the only kind of dense-ish area is now 1.5 miles away from the school. And so trying to fill those gaps and also, communicate with the community well, because a lot of people in the older subdivisions kind of feel, maybe abandoned by that change, right? Like we were moving from an area that's very convenient for them to an area that's less convenient. Not really, like most people don't necessarily think about the context of like, well, this is going to be safer and it's going to be, less prone to like mold and mildew and those kind of long-term health and maintenance problems that come with being in a really low wet area. So that's a challenge. But we were able to in 2020, so all through the early pandemic, we were working on a Safe Routes to School plan with the support of like a service grant, the PIP program. And we came up with a Safe Routes to School plan through that program, and then applied for a Safe Routes to School construction grant. And so we've been working on design and hopefully soon we'll get into the construction phase of the Safe Routes to School trail, which, because that program is funded by the gas tax, had to be along a highway, which isn't always the way that people travel, right? So we also got applied for and won a community paths grant to kind of turn one of those preferred community use trails, the goat path, right, into a formal paved trail, so that and this is actually closing like a gap of service that like doesn't exist, right? Like from the old like residential hub to the new like tribal services hub, there are no pedestrian facilities and there are no bike lanes for a chunk of that. And so we're working to close that gap so that we don't just have students who want to or have to walk to school to be doing so on, the shoulder of a road that's 55 or 45 miles an hour. Those are kind of the two options right now that kids are walking along. They just are, right? Like they walk along that shoulder because they don't have a better option. And I will say that we are now building infrastructure. Like we can look out one of my neighbors' office windows to see construction going in around the new Tribal Services Center. So there's infrastructure going in to develop a new residential subdivision right adjacent to the school, so that tribal members, it's kind of supporting tribal members who want to move back onto the reservation, but there's housing issues and land development issues on allotted lands that make it really difficult for tribal members to live on the reservation. So there will be, and that infrastructure has been specifically and very intentionally designed to be very pedestrian and bicycle oriented. There'll be off-road trails through the neighborhood, as well as, sidewalks on the road, so that people who are able to and want to walk to a school or work in the nearby community are going to have safe facilities to do so.
Thank you so much. Liz, yes, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, Dani, you bring a good point out when you mentioned the old goat path, because in our tribal communities, such as where our tribal admin sets and different infrastructures that we have, one challenge that we have to deal with is where our current administration sits. It's called Bezexuis, place of the Flint. So one of the challenges that we have as tribal developers, I guess you could say, planners, is that a lot of times we have to deal with cultural resources, because in our communities we have layers of occupancy on excuse me, I'm a little groggy. I woke up this morning, I was a little congested because my hay fever is kicking in, but just layers of previous life, thousands of years going back. And so a lot of these the designs that we put into place, we have to take into consideration what are we building on. And so sometimes that kind of has an impact on just how can we design something to not impact it anymore, a cultural resource, irreplaceable, or how do we navigate those waters when we want to continue our occupancy in our environment. And so that becomes a challenge, and a lot of our kids walk by these things. They've been walking, their parents have walked by our cambium pill trees or house pits, on their way, and so that's, I like that you brought that out, Dani, about that. I mean, that's a very important part of, when we design something, what we take into account of how are we going to impact that. And it's within the community. It's just not for tribal members, but the community members have lived there as well all those years.
Yeah, we have a really strong relationship with our cultural resources program, and we work really closely with them whenever we do new development or create plans for areas, and trying to make sure that we're honoring the ancestors that are there. And and that looks different in different cases, right? Like, so sometimes we have like cultural resources that it's like, just don't touch it, don't point it out, just like leave it alone. And other resources, it's like, let's make a plaque here to show people that like this is history that we're proud of, right? Like there's a story that I really want to see told, and I don't know that it's like really prominent in the community. It's one that I've heard from via like the Tamaslikt, but I don't think I've seen it. Like they have so much history and so much oral history that's not like, they just don't have enough room for it in the museum, right? So it's one of those kind of stories that's not like on the wall, but there's a trail that we want to build that would follow the Umatilla River path into the town of Pendleton. And apparently at the Pendleton Roundup, right, the rodeo, that's kind of the city of Pendleton's claim to fame. At the first rodeo, they came to the tribal community and said, we want you to come to the rodeo and put on a performance of kind of a cowboys and Indians show, and you have to lose. And so the tribal community, the tribal leaders, they basically just like didn't say anything. And the Pendleton people like left. And so what they ended up doing was they rode along the Umatilla River into town on the day of the rodeo in full war regalia. And like literally there were like settler women like fainting and screaming in the streets because they thought they were being invaded. And they showed up and they pitched a tent next to the rodeo. They were there to participate in the rodeo, but they weren't there to be the, kind of the show, the play Indian, right? And like, that's a story that I'm like, I want to create this trail so that people can have a safe way to get into town, because it is, our like shopping hub, right? Like that's where the grocery stores are. But I also want to be able to like tell, like give the community the opportunity to tell these stories, because they're the history of the community.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that, Dani and Les. This is a little bit of a change for my next question that I was going to ask, but I know that you all have a lot of partners that you're working with on these infrastructure projects, on these education projects. So, I mean, have you had challenges in the past where maybe a partner doesn't understand the culture of your tribe and having to explain that to them? And I'm just interested if you've had difficulties with that, or how you approach those partnerships so that they're understanding the needs and the culture of the tribe. Do
you want to go first, Les and Jared?
I can speak not so much outside agencies, but just and I'm not trying to knock our own tribe, but internally, I think when we talk about projects and cultural acceptance, it does lead to a lot of internal discussion amongst community members and tribal leaders and other department staff, tribal cultural etiquette. Like, for example, I know Les can speak to this a little bit more, but we completed a project and we had to name street signs, and there's a big push to reinstill, which rightfully so, reinstill cultural language and institutionalize it, make our people read those words and understand what they mean. And That's all good. But on the other side, the tribal members that live in the community are very concerned about whether the guy can read the street signs that's coming to clean their chimney, or the guy that's delivering FedEx packages to the community. Can he get it there right? Is that going to confuse him? So I know we had to kind of meet everybody in the middle and kind of put the English name of the street plus the tribally accepted name. And then even with the tribally accepted name, Les, I know he can speak more to, he had to go through a pretty thorough process to actually get the right. We have 8 different dialects in our language that are known, and not everybody's in agreement which one we should be using. So it kind of like we have to go through this roundabout kind of name session to get the names correct, and how they're going to be actually published and printed, and how we're going to install them. So when people see them live, there's no disagreements. So it's an interesting process internally with us when it comes to projects and protecting cultural resources, or just having cultural memorabilia out in the public. It definitely goes through a pretty scrutinized process internally.
Just to follow up on that point, the new tribal subdivision that's right next to the school was approved by the CTUIR Board of Trustees to be solely named in Umatilla. And that there's definitely some contention, but not kind of to the level of like, I hadn't heard that it, it hasn't made the papers, or, like I haven't heard that there's been drama about it. I think but it is kind of funny that my boss, the planning director, is Cayuse. So it's more of a decision that was made when we consulted with the language program they were like, here's the ones that we suggest, and they were Umatilla. But yeah, they are just going to be in the tribal language, and I think the thing that makes that a little simpler is that they're fairly distinct words. So it's going to be numbered streets that run north to south, and then the east. No, that's flipped. They run east to west, and then the north-south streets are the first foods in order out from the 0 street. So they're going to be, there's like elk and salmon on the men's side, and then there's gathered foods like the huckleberry and the roots on the women's side. So they thought very intensely in the layout, and it's going to be interesting, like making non-tribal people learn CTUIR words if they want to deliver the mail, or come clean a chimney.
Our internal processes, as you were saying, both Jared and Dani, vetting that out to our culture and heritage department, and of course the elders and the language committee as well. It goes through quite a process, and as you say, there's because we do have Klamath, Modoc, and Yehushkin, and so it's finding the right name and to fit that sign, and at some point she's just say, well, you guys come up with a name, we'll print it and we'll put it up.
Pretty much.
And it sounds good. Okay, but and I think working with ODOT, your other part of the question, I believe, how do we work with other agencies? Just about all of our road systems follow old Indian trails. And so there's, of course, numerous cultural resources along those routes when we want to do a road expansion, and vetting that out early and going through a lengthy process, which most of you might have, if you've worked for ODOT or been involved in those meetings. It's a collaboration of all those agencies putting their heads together and coming out, how do we thread that needle through whatever path we need to choose. Sometimes it's not always a win-win situation for all parties, but then there's always the next project to where you may win. And of course, our resources are irreplaceable, those along the route. And as I mentioned right there, the the picture, my background. I don't know if I'm sure you all can see it. It's called Grandma Butte. And so it overlooks Willow Loxley, which is the Beatty Valley. And so there's all these kind of things that are taken into consideration when developing, and that's right alongside a road. You know, what do we do? So we have fairly good partners with ODOT. And so, and they're pretty familiar with a lot of dealing with cultural resources along these routes. And it just takes a lot of good collaboration, a lot of good discussion. And they do recognize that the tribes have been here since time immemorial. And so we're able to work very well with those partners.
Thank you. Thank you
Oh,
all.
I was going to say, I would echo that sentiment that mostly we work with ODOT, sometimes Umatilla County. Umatilla County, probably similar to Klamath County, is a rural county, spread thin, doesn't really have the dollars to, to do the maintenance that's needed or, improvements that are needed. And so oftentimes I've found at the very least with Umatilla County that, if I'm willing to put in the legwork, they're just going to say, that's a great idea. We support you because they don't have time to do it. So they're glad somebody's doing it.
Yeah, a lot of times the county comes before they do their annual spraying, of course, along those, some of those places that have foods and materials for basket making. They go to the Culture and Heritage Department and say, hey, we're spraying, or there's actually places where they just decide that not, they don't spray.
Yeah, and it's hard for us. We have similar situations where it's actually not a straightforward question of whether to spray or not to spray, because we have some really awful noxious weeds that might be as dangerous as the sprays, right? So we have there's a type of thistle out here that's invasive that causes neurological damage in horses, and we are a horse culture, so things like that where we're just we don't really know, we have to look at all the options and say, is it better to spray, right? Even if it's gross chemicals. Not easy decisions for sure.
Thank you. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to leave us with one question, and then we can open up if anyone else has questions as well. And but yeah, so I just wanted to again thank you three for coming and sharing with us. For my last question, I just want to give you the floor to talk about any upcoming safe routes projects and anything you're excited about for safe routes and promoting biking and walking for students in your communities. And Jared, we'll start with you.
Like mentioned earlier, I know Les covered in detail the main project we're working on, and so that's going to be our I guess our pilot project into safe routes for schools. We're carving off a section of our overall program. We're still moving forward with some pretty big transportation infrastructure projects with other tribal properties, and so me and Les are going to multitask and still try to address these biped community safety issues. And so I think the one he described with the fitness center and our main hub is going to be the one that's coming down the turnpike pretty fast for us. So I can definitely let Les speak more about that, but he can tell you about, there's a whole other list of other ones, and he can describe to you kind of what our next steps working with the city on that are.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, we do have a whole list of streets listed from, and really it's kind of coming from the school working its way out in the community, and we'll just have to keep close contact with our partners in the city, and work on those as those dollars become available from, it is a joint effort. So meeting with them and talking with them, just kind of what baby steps do we improve the shoulders? Do we do some striping, improved crosswalk signage is a big one, and those are just little things. So I think moving into the future, as some of these dollars do come available, we'll be able to of course, not repave the street, or maybe we might be able to. It just depends on their plan. Of course, there's the city and ODOT and us, that it's a three-way deal here. So, just keep our eyes and ears open to any opportunity that we can to participate and deliver those services for the children and the community.
And so over here at CTUIR, we're kind of in an exploratory stage because so we have a transportation system plan that was voted in 2001. Since then, we've become the CTUIR has developed the region's essentially commuter bus system. So, in our current transportation system plan, there is no transit. And now we have lines that go, I think their width span is something like 90 miles. So they go east to Oregon on the Columbia River, and or west to Oregon on the Columbia River, and east to La Grande over the mountains. And so that's and that's essentially based on CTUIR's ceded territory. That's kind of the blueprint for the service area, because like Les and Jared mentioned with Klamath, our community has somewhat spread to the winds, and they're all over Oregon and Southwest Washington, and there is more of a concentration in that area. So being able to create those connections is really valuable to this community. And so there's been a lot of change. There's been changes to the casino, changes to the service center, and so we're trying to look forward to how we want to best serve that. And I think it's a really great opportunity to refocus, because 20 years ago it was just a given that rural communities only drive cars. And I think we have seen more and more that that's not realistic. And the people who walk out here often don't have choices. And so, they are the most vulnerable in our community and need safe facilities to do so, where we're able to provide them. And so I think we're pretty lucky in that respect, and that that's what we're doing right now in a time where that is a big part of the conversation, how to better serve the more vulnerable people and create more bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure.
Right. Well, thank you all again for answering my questions. I'll open it up now to see if anyone in the audience has any questions.
I have a question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my question is more on the education side of things. So if you all don't have experience or context for this question, that's totally fine. But I have some background on traditional environmental knowledge, which has its roots in Indigenous communities. And I'm just always curious and interested in sort of bridging the environmental land connection with safe routes and infrastructure improvements. So I'm curious if and how any of your communities sort of make that connection, and if you see connection with the land showing up in safe routes or transportation programming.
Do you guys want to share? Or I do have some background on this. Or
Go ahead, Dani.
Okay. So the CTUIR Department of Natural Resources has devoted a lot of energy into and sometimes reacquiring lost knowledge, right? The kind of boarding school era was notorious for stripping Indigenous communities of their traditional knowledge, language, and cultural connections. And so they reacquire knowledge from adjacent tribes and rebuild those knowledge bases, and gather oral histories to collect that information. And so the after school program actually has a really robust, they do language education, they do they actually go on field trips. They have this community has seasonal feasts, and the students are taken out into the field to harvest the food when it's feast season. So the actual the food that's at the table at the traditional feast is picked by the kids, and the connection is more with land than with transportation, honestly, because a lot of that land was sold off and is not in tribal hands anymore. And so they've actually rebuilt a lot of or they've created a network of property owners who's willing to, give them an easement or a contract that says they have the right to collect tribal foods on private property. And so that connection is really less with the transportation network than with the community. And yeah, it's exciting to see that that rebuilt. And it's through the after school program, but the Safe Routes to School doesn't have that range because a lot of the first foods are up in the mountains, which is about 15 miles away.
I guess, me and Les specifically with tribal transportation programs, we haven't integrated that type of educational level definitely with the youth and traditional practices and exercising of treaty rights on the tribal land. But I can assure you it's a topic of major interest amongst our tribal community. And I believe a lot of talks at the general council and the community level have brought up these issues about getting back more connected with our land. And I think there's a general concern. What we're seeing, we're a landless tribe, kind of watching private property owners, but also other agencies, other federal and state agencies, I guess you could say, managing public lands in a manner, I guess you could say, has our community questioning the management practices very heavily, because it does have a direct and indirect impact on our treaty resources, from plant root gathering, definitely from fishing. Our tribe culturally and traditionally was known as a fishing tribe. While the big game treaty resources, elk and deer, we're seeing patterns and impacts that I guess we feel as tribal members, it's frustrating because we're not scientists by trade, but we're connected to the land spiritually and culturally. So we see the impacts, even though we don't have a log sheet full of data telling us there's something going on. We see with our eyes, and we kind of see just by our general observation of what's happening to the animals and the ecosystems around it, that there's a disconnect going on. And obviously what we fear the most is, will our younger generations ever have an opportunity to practice some of our traditional gathering and harvests that used to be accustomed in our way of life? And so it's starting to come to a head. And I even see our younger generations, our youth council, for example, speaking pretty loud on these issues. They may be a little rough around the edges with their knowledge and their experiences, but they know something's wrong, and they're starting to get very loud in the community. And they've even been to the county, they've been to the local newspapers with their voice. And to me, it's kind of, it's the same thing I'm hearing amongst the adults in the tribal membership. So I think I see a lot of awareness coming pretty soon within our community. And I think it's going to be a topic that's going to be talked about quite a bit over the next decade.
Thank you all so much. I think in the service of time, we'll stop questions there. But if you have any questions that you have for the speakers, you can email info@oregonsaferoutes.org and we can get those answers for you. Awesome. I'm going to share my screen again just to finish up here. I just want to end with a few quick announcements and resources. These will be sent out with the webinar and the slides after the presentation. I'll send that out tomorrow for everyone. Here's some resources too. Leanne mentioned these earlier. We have the tribal lands map. Again, I encourage everyone to go and look up your lands that you are living on and see which tribal lands you're living on and learn more. There's a link here to the free online class that Leanne mentioned. I started it last week and it's really great. I definitely recommend it. We have a list of documentaries on tribal history. On our website too, we've included a resource blog for if you want to create land acknowledgements, some pros and cons to that, things to consider, and other resources as well. Then to kind of off-topic announcements and resources for this upcoming month. We've created a toolkit with Earth Month resources for Safe Routes programming. So if you'd like to do some Earth Month, Earth Day focused planning and events for your schools, we have a toolkit on the website now with that. We have a version up there right now, so you can go look at it, download some social media ideas for activities. So that is available to you on the website. And then final announcement, we will not have an April webinar, but instead encourage everyone to attend the Oregon Active Transportation Summit, which is hosted by the Street Trust. That'll be, Nora, if you remember, I think it's April 26th to 28th.
April 25th to the 27th.
Thank you so much. I forgot to write that down. Excellent. Yes, thank you again to Dani, Les, and Jared. Really appreciated you three coming and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. I will be sending out this recording and all of the resources and slides tomorrow. So thank you all so much.
Emily, can I add a quick 2 additional announcements that I'm popping in the chat right now, which is when we actually have a job opening at ODOT in our active transportation world. So I'm including that link in the chat in case anyone knows anybody who might be interested in joining the active transportation team at ODOT. And also our Safe Routes to School grants are all due this Friday at 11:59 p.m. So included the link to how to access those grants if you haven't heard about those grants yet. They're due this week. And thank you again to our panel so much for your time today. Really appreciate your time and sharing of your wisdom. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for reminding me about the grants, and I forgot to put it on here. Yes, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. It's great. You have your lunch hour now for lunch instead of a webinar. So this will be great. All right. Thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.